Give me the bad news.
There's no way out of here alive.
What's the good news?
It doesn't look like we're going to be here for long.
I'd like to start this video off by stating something that maybe I don't have to state, and that is that I don't really like to cover the news. One reason that I don't like to cover the news is because I feel like shills cover the news. I feel like when I look around on these alternative platforms, a lot of the people who cover the news are shills. And I feel like one thing that these shills are doing is they're having us be witness to things that maybe we don't want to be witness to. You know, for instance, there is a narrative going on. I'm aware that there is a narrative going on, and that there is a hidden hand controlling pretty much every aspect of this narrative. And I believe that this hidden hand, I believe that these forces, I believe they want us to be witness to these things. And I was going to be making a video about this. Actually, I should have included the snapshot, so I'll just kind of briefly mention this. In 2014, there was a study done on Facebook that found that they could manipulate people's emotions and manipulate people's thoughts. They can manipulate what people were thinking depending on what was in a person's newsfeed. So they found that if they put certain things in a person's newsfeed, and I believe they actually did this, they actually intentionally tinkered with a person's newsfeed, and they put stuff inside of their newsfeed that was able to actually affect that person's thoughts and emotions. So because of this, I really don't like to cover much of what the Mockingbird media talks about. And there's a reason why they're all repeating the same narrative. But for those reasons, I don't generally like to cover the news. However, when I do come across a news story that I believe is worth covering, usually I try to present a new perspective of it. So I want to mention a couple of things here. The first thing that I want to mention, because this seems to be out of most people's, media, I guess most media outlets aren't covering this, so I guess it's worth covering, and that is that the UN found that Ukrainian forces put civilians at risk in Ukraine. Now, they found actually specifically that they put people at risk at a nursing home, and what they basically did is they set up their forces around this nursing home, and then they didn't let these people who were at the nursing home evacuate. They basically forced them to stay there, and they used them as human shields. Now, there were other reports, there are other aspects to this story of how they put up their weapon systems in populated residential areas. Now, this is something, if you pay attention to other media outlets, if you're not just stuck in the same echo chamber, this is something that has been known for a very long time. This is something that Russia and Russian media has been exposing for a while. And although this has been known for a very long time, reports of this have been basically pushed to the side. Actually, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, maybe I'll take a screenshot because I don't have it here in my bit of information, but I believe it was around May. There were some people who wanted to speak before the United Nations, and they wanted to say exactly this. This is actually what they wanted to talk about, and they wanted to talk about how essentially the Ukrainian forces will put their tanks like basically on the first level of a building, like they'll knock out the first level of a building and they'll put their tanks there and their forces there, and then the top part of the building is all civilian housing. And, you know, there were a lot of reports of this for a very long time, and I've seen videos firsthand of what appears to be, and this is like hearsay, I mean, I can only talk about what is seen in the video. And essentially there are videos out there, or at least there were videos, a lot of them have been taken down, of what appears to be Ukrainians trying to flee certain parts of Ukraine. And this was also very early on in the war. While they're trying to flee at night, they come under heavy fire and a lot of them were killed. And reports at the time were that the Ukrainian forces didn't want these people fleeing, and that if they were able-bodied men, and if they were fleeing, they were basically treated as like traitors. Like, you know, people who were going AWOL, you know, because, like, I think that they had this draft. So they didn't want people fleeing, and people who were fleeing were basically seen as enemies, and they were shot and killed. And I'm sure that stories like this will never be covered by the media. But anyway, what I want to cover in this video isn't just these atrocities by the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian military. And by the way, just because I'm pointing this out about Ukraine doesn't mean that Russia is all innocent in this either. So let's look at what I really want to cover here, which is that Ukraine or Ukrainian forces shot up a nuclear facility, shot up the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, and then tried blaming Russia for it. And I'm going to prove that it was Ukraine in this video. And I'm actually going to do it using their own propaganda. Using the BBC propaganda, I'm going to prove that it's most definitely not the Russian forces that shot up this nuclear power plant. So let's check out this article. So I believe it's pronounced Zaporizhzhia or something like that. Real risk of nuclear disaster in Ukraine. Watchdog. Okay, so the UN's nuclear watchdog has called for an immediate end to any military action near Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, warning of a very real risk of a nuclear disaster. IAEA chief Rafael Mariano Grassi said he was extremely concerned by reports of shelling at Europe's largest nuclear power plant. It comes as Ukraine said parts of the facility were seriously damaged by Russian military strikes. So this is what Ukraine said, right? Russia seized the plant in March. Okay, so just right here, a little question mark should go over people's head. And it should be that, okay, wait a second, if Russia seized this plant in March, that means Russia has control over this plant, which means that Russian troops are probably stationed at or near this plant. And even if the troops aren't stationed at or near this plant is still a Russian asset because it is under Russian control. And once again, it's the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. It has kept its Ukrainian employees, and this is Russia. It is Russia. It has kept its Ukrainian employees. I just want to say these people cannot write. Like, this is not how a news report should be written. Like, these bullet points. This just goes to show that society is really declining. People's capacity to write really declining, and this is something that I see firsthand as somebody who's going to school for English teaching. People cannot write. It's awful. But anyway, so Russia seized the plant in March. It has kept its Ukrainian employees, but Kiev accuses Russian forces of firing rockets at civilian areas from the site, employing terror tactics. Oh, you mean at civilian areas where you people are stationed? Like, I mean, absolutely absurd, okay? So, they're employing terror tactics, okay? So this is also hilarious, though, because Kiev is accusing Russian forces of firing rockets at civilians from this site. So they're like, oh yeah, Russia's actually at this site firing rockets from this site. So it's like, wait a second. So Russia does have military equipment there, and they have rockets there, but you're saying they also shot themselves there. Like, this doesn't make any frickin' sense. So Friday's strike underlined the very real risk of a nuclear disaster that could threaten public health and the environment in Ukraine and beyond, Mr. Grassi said in a statement. Any military firepower directed at or from the facility would amount to playing with fire, with potentially catastrophic consequences, he added. So here Mr. Grassi, he probably realizes, like, oh yeah, it's probably not Russia who fired at the plant. So he has to say, oh yeah, anybody who's even firing from the plant, from the facility, they're also a bad guy. Even though there's no evidence that they are firing from the facility. But you know what? They're just basically, I think that they're just covering themselves here. Where it's like, yeah, if Russia is firing from that plant, please, Russia, do not fire from that plant because Ukraine, or at least Zelensky, is dumb enough to think that that is an excuse for him to be able to fire at your troops that are at the plant. It's ridiculous anyway. So yeah, this guy just wants to come in. He wants to come in for technical support. And he's like, yeah, we want to help you guys out. And, to me, that's totally understandable. So for the sake of protecting people in Ukraine and elsewhere from the potential nuclear accident, we must all set aside our differences and act now. The IAEA is ready, said Mr. Grassi, days after stating that the plant was completely out of control. So the plant is apparently completely out of control. So it's not just like some minor damage to the plant, according to this guy. So the operator of this plant said and it's hilarious, check out how they word this. The operator of the Zaporizhzhia, or however you pronounce it, Zaporizhzhia plant, said that the Russian missile strikes had forced the closure of one, quote, power unit, adding that there was a risk of radioactive leaks. So right here, they're making it as if like the operator, the guy who's operating at this plant, agrees that it was the Russian military strike. But look, they didn't quote him here. They only quoted him here in the power unit. So here it's just all deception. They're like, oh yeah, the operator said that the Russian military strikes. It's like, wait a second, you're just leading there. Are you sure he said exactly the Russian missile strikes? Are you saying that this guy agrees that it was the Russians who attacked this plant? I don't think so. Anyway, the strikes, quote, caused a serious risk for the safe operation of the plant, unquote. Operator, this guy's name, wrote on Telegram. So the plant is not in a good condition. Okay, there is a serious problem going on here, and they're trying to blame it on the Russians. And of course, they're trying to blame it on the Russians because then it's like, oh yeah, now other countries have to come in and intervene because Russia is a threat for all of Europe. And that's basically what they're trying to set up here. They're trying to pull people into a war so they can kill as many of us as possible. And that's really the whole purpose of this. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and skip ahead, and I'm going to show exactly where Russia is at here. The rest is just basically propaganda. They're just like, oh yeah, it's Russia. Oh yeah, actually, this is actually what's really funny. Let me cover this one part. Let's see what the European Union said, right? So, however, the EU, European Union, has hit out at Moscow over the latest shelling with the bloc's top diplomat, this douchebag, saying it, quote, condemns Russia's military activities around the plant. This is a serious and irresponsible breach of nuclear safety rules and another example of Russia's disregard for international norms, he said, and called for the IAEA to be granted access to the plant. So check this out. So, you got all this propaganda going around, and then you have these top diplomats talking as if this propaganda is facts. It's like, oh yeah, Russia's at fault here. Russia's over here having a disregard for international norms. And, of course, totally ignoring this news. It's like, yeah, Ukraine's a perfect angel. Zelensky, he's just perfect. And then they're just blaming Russia, basically. So here's the map. And as you can see, it's not like Russia has only partial control over this nuclear power plant. Russia has total control over this nuclear power plant and the surrounding areas. And they have this very strategic river over here that makes it very difficult for the Ukrainian forces to cross and retake this spot. So this is a very strategic position that the Russians have here, and it's well within their territory of control or their sphere of influence. And Ukraine's over here, and Ukraine is claiming that Russia shelled themselves. That oh yeah, Russia decided to just up and turn around and create a nuclear disaster over here that would force all of their troops out. To me, this is just like the move of a madman. Let's say if I'm wrong, there's no hidden hands, and these are just, separate madmen. This is the move of a total effing madman. Only a total madman, Zelensky, would do something like this, where it's like he sees a no-win situation, so he's going to up and create a nuclear disaster and then try to blame it on Russia. This nuclear disaster will not benefit Russia in any way, but yet they're trying to blame Russia. But anyway, I'm going to end the video here. I just wanted to kind of cover this propaganda, show the propaganda, how they're showing it. And these people over here, these people are all criminals. This person who's writing for the BBC, I'm sorry, if you ever watch this video, I think that you're a criminal. To me, I think that you should be arrested and you should be tried right next to all of these other criminals. You are a corrupt criminal. You are an enemy against humanity because you refuse to cover the truth. You refuse to expose the truth. Instead, what you really do is you try to muddy the waters to make it very difficult for people to come across the truth. So to me, George Wright, if that's even your real name, I'm sure that you changed your name, but regardless, George Wright, you're a criminal. And I would love to see you and all of the other criminals in a real court in the not-too-distant future.
Hey, in some parts of the universe, maybe not in contempo casual, but in some parts, it's considered cool to know what's going on in the world.